you can join us. And it's particularly significant since it is Earth Day. Um, and as many of you know, Earth Day actually was originated in 1970, believe it or not. And it's traditionally held on April 22nd. So when Don McGregor, who's chairing the program committee for Sustainable Rossmoor Earth Month celebration, when we were planning the activities for the month, I said, do you think I could have actually have April 22nd for our TPPC presentation? And he said, yes. So thank you, Don. The next slide, Barry. The various members of our Tree Planting and Preservation Committee who have played lead roles in directing our various project initiatives will be presenting today. The following a very brief overview of our Tree Planting and Preservation Committee, which I will give, Jerry McNear, who is a landscape architect, will be presenting on trees for the 21st century. And this will include recommendations and also some tree planting guidelines. This will be followed by a presentation on our Rossmoor Tree Tours initiative, which I will give. And I've been working on that with a working group, which I will mention once we start that initiative, of which Jim Pearson has been instrumental. I'm hoping Jim can join us on this call today. Adrian Roth, who has been instrumental in planning and implementing the acorn harvesting and planting initiative in Rossmoor, will be presenting next, followed by Bruce Poster, who will do a presentation on the partnership the TPPC has with the Arbor Day Foundation. And Barry Bryan, who's Vice President of Sustainable Rossmoor, will be presenting on the Eden Reforestation Fundraising Initiative, followed by Leland McCullough, who has become quite expert after reviewing films on trees and the environment. And she'll be providing us with an overview of certain films she's identified that may be of interest to many of you. Next slide. In terms of ground rules for today, we ask that everybody mute yourselves. We will be encouraging you to send questions, but we ask that you send them via the chat feature on your Zoom app. We will address your questions at the conclusion of all the presentations. And we also ask that you include your name along with your question. And also, if you would like follow-up from any of our presenters, please include your email address. Next slide. The Tree Planting and Preservation Committee was formed in January 2020. It was part of an initiative undertaken by Sustainable Rossmoor to involve its members in identifying and prioritizing key environmental issues and concerns. Tree planting was identified by a significant number of members as an environmental issue that they wish to become involved in addressing. Next slide. As a result of reviewing research on the importance of trees in combating climate change, it became clear to us that we needed to expand our focus beyond tree planting to include tree preservation, since mature trees are essential in sequestering carbon. The purpose of our Tree Planting and Preservation Committee is to improve the health of our local as well as our global community by promoting the planting and preservation of trees. and we are particularly focused on issues of global warming and the importance of trees in providing oxygen and improving air quality, absorbing pollutants, sequestering carbon, and lowering air temperature and reducing heat intensity. However, we also know that trees have many other benefits, including conserving energy, absorbing and storing rainwater, preserving soil, supporting wildlife, and promoting our mental health and well-being, and enhancing our quality of life. I'm happy now to turn over the presentation to Jerry McNear, who will be discussing planting trees for the 21st century. Jerry?
You have to unmute her or ask her to unmute.
Jerry, can you unmute yourself?
No, she can't unmute herself.
Okay,
let me go and
oh, I have her. I have her here.
oh.
Okay, and I've unmuted on my end here.
Great, thank you, Jerry.
Sure. So we've heard a lot about the benefits of trees in our environment. And during the last few decades, we've heard probably even more about how little water we have, not enough rainfall. We need to find ways to save water. One of the things that I've heard is people talk about we need to just plant small trees because large trees really use too much water. But maybe we should think about that. Maybe that's not the right answer. And reason for that is we're dealing with more than just one problem, which is not enough water. And especially after this really dry winter we've been having or had. As Valerie Truitt, a professor at the Lab of Tree Ring Research at University of Arizona, explained it, what we're seeing now is fundamentally different from mega droughts that we've had in the past. And that's because they are increasingly temperature driven. What that means is as it gets hotter, you evaporate more water from the soil, plants and trees need more water. And so higher temperatures really cause us an extra water problem. So in essence, really dealing with three related problems: less rainfall, temperatures are hotter, as well as more extreme weather. So we're having intense rain coming all at once, stronger winds, which a lot of people have noticed here the last couple of days, more stormwater runoff, etc. The good news is there's something that can help with all three of those problems. And the good news is trees. So planting trees, shrubs, vines, any kind of greenery is really one of the easiest and least expensive ways to make droughts less severe. It reduces summer temperatures. It helps us save water because plants that are shaded don't need as much water, and reduces the temperatures around us, keeping us cool as well. So how do we best use trees to keep us cool? Next slide. So one of the ways that's not part of our guidelines, but could be included, is learn to use water on the plants that help us the most, trees, for example, and not use as much water on things that don't provide all those benefits. Our favorite friend, lawn, which we all love. So if you can't concentrate solely on using less water, we need to learn how to be smarter about how we use it. So guideline number 1 says, plant the largest species possible. Why shouldn't we just plant smaller trees since they use less water? And that's because large trees do so much more for us for the amount of water used than the smaller trees. So we want to watch what we're doing here. One of the reasons the Acorn Project has been so popular is because our oak trees become very large and they do a lot for us. They're long-lived and they're important to our well-being as well as to our neighbors. So guideline number 2, plant trees to shade buildings, streets, parking lots whenever possible. So we do that by planting usually deciduous trees, primarily on the east and west sides of our homes. So tall, narrow trees can be used at the tops of slopes so that we can see our favorite views below the branches and the trees grow up above us. And then we use shorter spreading trees at the bottom of the slopes to screen our view of the rooftops below. Dark colored asphalt parking lots and streets can be a lot cooler if they are shaded by trees, and it really does impact the temperature around us. Guideline number 3, choose trees with low water needs except in special circumstances. So we're really experiencing some good drought conditions now, and we need to continue watering them by finding trees that use less water. If you're interested in finding out more about how we would use trees and which trees or plants to use, there's several good resources. WUCOLS, if you want to throw out some fancy names. WUCOLS is WUCOLS. It stands for Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. And you can look that up online. You would be looking for WUCOLS 4, 4th edition. And they have plant lists that you can go through and you can sort them by their water use. East Bay Mud's book, Plants and Landscapes for Summer Dry Climates, and Select Tree, which is put out by Cal Poly. So it's selecttree.calpoly.org. Those 3 are excellent for helping you learn about which plants use less water. Guideline number 4, select trees that are resilient to pests and diseases and are not invasive. For example, there's some places in the Bay Area and even in Rossmoor where you will see Mexican feathergrass, and it's a lovely, easy grass, but it's extremely flammable and it can spread into natural areas, crowding out native plant species, and it can be difficult to eradicate. So finding out more about our trees and plants that we do include in our landscaping is really important. And guideline number 5 is diversify tree selections wherever possible. So one of the things that Rebecca Poland and the landscape department is working on right now is to find new plants that our friendly deer won't eat to the nubbins, and will diversify our tree selection here. For example, California's oak trees are a good example of why we need diversity. Some oaks are more susceptible to sudden oak death, which is now found throughout the state. So we need to be sure we diversify and plant the less susceptible species. So that brings us to our slogan for the day, which makes all of this really easy to remember, which is stay green to stay cool and save water. Thank you. Marilyn, you want to show the last slide? Or no, I guess that was it now. Thank you.
What about this slide that we're on now, Jerry? Can you address that one?
Yes, I sure can. So one of the reasons that we wanted to discuss specifically is one of the other reasons why we want big trees, other than their shade and other immediate benefits that they provide to us, is because they are so important for sequestering carbon. And there have been a lot of studies, not just the US Geological Survey, which have examined carbon storage. And when we're having wildfires, we're losing some of these large older trees, but they are so important to sequestering carbon, much better than any of the other smaller trees, that it's vital we learn how to take care of the ones that we have, which means we need to learn where to water them It means not watering them with bubblers. It means understanding that most of their roots for a lot of species is in the top 6 inches of the soil. The importance of having mulch where we have some of our trees, and finding out how you water them and not overwater them. So big trees are important to us, and we have beautiful species here in Rossmoor, and we need to do all we can to make sure that they stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Next, I'll be speaking about the Rossmoor Tree Tour Initiative. And before I begin, I would like to expressly thank the members, certain members of our committee who have been very actively involved in working on this initiative, including Nancy Munson, Jerry McNair, Cynthia Parnell, Bob Hass, and very, very importantly, Jim Pearson, who has made invaluable contributions. So first of all, thank you to all of you for your efforts. And like much of the work that this Tree Planting and Preservation Committee does, we have leads on certain initiatives, but it really relies on all the members of our committee getting involved and working and being supportive. So I think that's why our committee has been as productive as it has been during this past year. The tree planting, the Rossmoor Tree Tours initiative started months ago with working collaboratively with Rebecca Pollen on the idea of guided tree tours. And we had progressed considerably along with our work with Rebecca and putting guided tree tours in place. And then COVID happened, and any efforts that would involve pulling together groups of people were put to a stop, as we all know. So this required that we sort of regroup and rethink how we wanted to approach this. So we decided to pursue the concept of self-guided tree tours, which would allow people to take the tour at their own leisure by themselves around Rossmoor. Thanks to Jim Pearson, we have learned quite a bit about the variety of trees in Rossmoor and the fact that they are unique in the East Bay. This is due to a combination of reasons. Many of the oak trees were already old when James Tice bought the land in the mid-1850s. He used the land primarily for grazing and cattle and wheat farming. Joseph Natali, who owned the land from 1876 to 1930, planted fruit trees and wine grapes, and was wise enough not to cut down the old oak, redwood, and pine trees in the valley. Stanley Dollar owned the land for 30 years from 1930 to 1960. He is reported to have loved trees and to have had over 80 different varieties planted in the area. We hope to place ID plaques on many of these trees with both their common name and their scientific name, as well as with a corresponding number for a self-guided tree tour walking map. We looked at, next slide. We looked at various areas of Rossmoor and decided to approach the self-guided tree tour in phases. The reason for locating our initial efforts in phase 1 on identifying trees around the golf courses and Dollar Clubhouse is because of the concentrated diversity of trees in these areas and the convenience of parking. 12 trees in the bandstand area already have plaques which were placed on them years ago by the Rotary Club. Most of these are in a dilapidated condition. And we will be replacing those plaques as part of our effort as well. The 31 trees we have chosen for phase 1 are by no means all inclusive. Phase 2 will include an additional number, approximately 30 trees from throughout Rossmoor. Residents are invited to suggest additional trees for inclusion in phase 2 of the tree tour. The selection of a tree will be dependent on its uniqueness, size, or concentration, such as the grove of buckeye trees by the tennis courts. We hope to eventually compile a complete list of every tree variety in Rossmoor. We have secured funding for phase 1 from Sustainable Rossmoor, for which we're very grateful, as well as from private donations. We are now awaiting for official approval from the Golden Rain Foundation. And Rebecca Paulin has been very supportive and helpful in proceeding with that. Next slide. We are also developing a link, a Rossmoor Tree Tour link that will be placed on the Sustainable Rossmoor website. And it will include a link to a map, a walking map, with the trees identified on the tour, identified by number that will correspond with the number on the tree, as well as a name and description of each tree. And we expect to launch phase 1 in June, hopefully. And then we'll need possibly some additional time to complete the website option. And I also would like to emphasize that any suggestions that any of you might have for special, unique, or beautiful trees for the tree tour, please send those to me via my email, which is identified at the end of our slide deck today. And now I think we go on to the next slide, Barry. And now I'd like to introduce Adrian Roth, who's instrumental in planning and implementing Rossmoor's Acorn Gathering and Planting Initiative. Adrian? Oh, we have to.
Am I unmuted?
Oh, you're now you're good, Adrian. Thank you.
Good. All right. Well, I just, first of all, happy Earth Day, everybody. I'm particularly glad to be presenting this part of our presentation because it's a hands-on part, sometimes dirty hands, but gratifying nonetheless. It was a really bountiful year. This slide will sort of sums up everything for acorns in 2020. And it's called When the Oaks Have That Many Acorns. It is called a mast year. And John Walkinshaw from the hiking club noticed it and started this movement of harvesting the acorns. So he represents the hiking club. I represent Sustainable Rossmoor. And a name you have heard several times already and we'll hear more is Rebecca Paulin. So John and Rebecca and I have really organized this group. But why go to all the effort to do it? Much of that Jerry has mentioned. White oak trees are native, they're all around us, so we know that they can grow here. Blue oak and valley oak seem to do particularly well. And as Jerry had pointed out well, is that they provide a lot of shade. They're big, they provide a lot of shade. They are good for our habitat, protect them, feed them. They add stability to our soils because of their root system, which goes out, and they're beautiful. But mainly for sustainability purposes, they capture carbon. and that helps clean our air and we get to live healthier. My personal love for trees and the oak trees is that it just makes me feel wonderful. It's good for my mental health. And just looking outside my condo, I get to see all these beautiful trees around me and it makes me feel great. Next slide. So 2020 was a mass year, and it was also our first collective acorn harvest because of that. We collected over 500 blue and live oak acorns. Most of that was done by Trails Club, and then there were some others. We put them in our refrigerators to keep them good or viable until it was time to plant. And we had intended to have this nice group demonstration of how to plant with all the tools and the instructions, and people can then plant on their own. But COVID had a different idea and we couldn't gather to do that. So we distributed instructions to those who volunteered about how to do it. Rebecca really was helpful to us in that way. And she also provided any tools that people didn't have that they might need in the planting. So we did about 500 blue and live oak acorns, and some, which I'll talk about, were formerly planted, and some were squirrel plantings, which is just planting the way squirrels do, just digging in the hole, putting the acorns in, covering it, and watering it. And voila, you get little sprouts of oak trees coming. Next slide, please. So where should we plant them? Well, Rebecca and John and I went around Rossmoor and we looked for the most viable places for the trees, and places that neighbors would agree with, and cited them and marked them so people would know where to do the planting, those who wanted to plant. Some found their own places as well. We needed viable acorns, which we had a little hint from Bob Simmons, who's done all this enormous amount of planting of trees in Walnut Creek open space, and where you take the acorns, put them in water, and those that rise to the top can be discarded because they've had either cracks in them or insects in them. So we discarded the ones that were not viable and planted in between 90 and 300 sites if you include the squirrel plantings. Typically, there were 3 acorns in a hole of only about 6 inches. They weren't very deep. And you would plant the acorns, I call them kissing cousins. So all the points of each acorn would be very close to each other. Sometimes we planted more in the same spot. And then we covered it with dirt and mulch and, of course, watered it. The formal plantings also had the metal protective enclosures we built and installed, and that would protect them from animals and other insects and other things that found those little delicious new sprouts irresistible. So when they mature, they're fine, but just until that time, we wanted to protect them. I didn't know how important that was until I saw that so many of my own squirrel plantings, which were amazingly successful, there were so many that came up. However, when I went to water them the second time, I think maybe a third of them were still there, and who knows how many now, because they were eaten by the various critters that came along. If you walk around Rossmoor, you may see these screens, and you want to take a look in them, and you might find a really nice surprise. You'll find little sprouts coming up. I know Leela has found them in hers, and a lot of us who've planted have found them growing up in our cages. It's very gratifying. But the work continues, and when it's hot and dry as it is now, we have to make sure we keep watering them at least every month, and probably for about 2 years. So that's mine. Bruce?
All right, thank you. I'm going to be talking about the Arbor Day Foundation and our initiative with them, which is to support the work of the Arbor Day Foundation to plant trees in order to reduce global warming. And of course, as indicated earlier, many other benefits come out of planting trees as well. So why the Arbor Day Foundation? We wanted to get as many trees planted as possible for our efforts, and we thought it would make sense to partner with someone, an organization already doing that rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. And we evaluated a number of different organizations that are planting trees in the US and around the world, like the Arbor Day Foundation, and found that they were a good fit for us, and we chose them to partner with. The Arbor Day Foundation began its work in 1972 in celebration of the 100th anniversary of the first Arbor Day, which was in Nebraska, in case you didn't know that. Arbor Day Foundation is one of the world's largest nonprofit conservation organizations involved with tree planting, and they plant and distribute more than 10 million trees every year. The foundation works with the U.S. Forest Service to get trees planted within our national forests, and more than 20 million trees have been planted in the national forest through their efforts. The foundation also recognizes communities that become tree cities that meet certain criteria, and in their commitment to planting and nurturing trees. And locally, there are some communities which I'll talk about in a little while. The foundation works with youth in childcare centers, elementary schools, preschools, and parks to connect children with nature. The foundation partners with colleges and businesses to plant trees and is itself a low-cost source of trees and free information on how to plant trees. The annual membership in the foundation is only $10 a year. I guess I should have told you to go to the next slide. The partnerships, oh no, I guess not. I'm sorry. That's yet to come. Okay. It's a $10 membership where you can donate more, and in return for that, you receive 10 free seedlings, the monthly newsletter, and a book on how to plant trees. And you can also purchase other merchandise then through the foundation. Next slide, please. So our activities that we're undertaking so far involve tabling events to distribute their promotional items and educational materials. And perhaps some of you saw we had a table today out in front of Gateway. Several of our members were at that. And tomorrow we're going to be doing it again from 9 to 4. So I hope some of you will come out and see us. I'll be there from 9 to 12:30, and Lois and Patty will be out there in the afternoon. We are submitting newspaper articles to help inform readers about tree planting and the Arbor Day Foundation, and maybe you saw the Earth Matters column in the Rossmoor News this week, which was about that issue. We promote the sale of gift trees that people can buy to honor or memorialize a loved one or a friend. Also the sale of promotional items such as Arbor Day coffee, gift to tree cards. You buy a gift card and it plants a tree, a variety of other merchandise. And next week, we're going to have a speaker from the Arbor Day Foundation who will be presenting on the benefits of tree planting and what the Arbor Day Foundation does. And if you're interested in that, I hope you will be. It's next Wednesday, April 28th at 2 o'clock, and you can use the same link as you're using today to get to that talk. Next slide. In the future, we're going to be undertaking some other activities, some of these more in the post-COVID world, working on tree campuses. We've begun and initiated something with the Kaiser Foundation that we hope will produce a tree campus there. The cities of Concord and Martinez near us are already tree cities, and we want to encourage Walnut Creek and also Lafayette to also become tree cities. And finally, we will be partnering with local schools to educate students and give them an opportunity to actually get on the ground and plant trees. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Bruce. I'm next to talk about the Eden Reforestation Project. I realized, though, that my responsibilities of being the tech in the background made it hard to do both things at the same time. What I did is right before, about a half hour ago or an hour ago, I recorded what I was going to say so that I could do two things at the same time. So, bear with me on that. So you'll see it here.
Good afternoon. I'm Barry Bryan.
Can you hear me?
Early on, the Tree Planning and Preservation Committee reviewed 21 organizations that we could partner with to maximize our mission. We identified two that we wanted to partner with. The first, Arbor Day Foundation, you already have heard about. The second was the internet search engine Ecosia. Ecosia uses over 80% of its profits to fund the Eden Reforestation Project. Every 45 searches on average results in one tree being planted in the rainforest. But then I made a $1,000 donation to Eden Reforestation Project. To my surprise, I got a letter in the mail saying that over 10,000 trees would be planted in the rainforest areas as a direct result of my donation. Over 10,000 trees. I couldn't believe it. Planting trees through Eden Reforestation Project is the most efficient way that we have found that each of us individually can use our money to combat climate change. Why should you donate to Eden Reforestation Project? Well, the cost of planting trees is less than 1/10 of the cost of planting trees through most of US-based nonprofits, less than 10 cents a tree. These trees sequester on average 2 metric tons of carbon over the course of their life. Your $100 donation, for example, will result in over 1,000 trees being planted. That's 2,000 metric tons of carbon being sequestered. Your trees will be planted in rainforests, the fastest growing regions on the planet. And finally, and just as importantly, the money is used to hire the poorest of the poor Indigenous workers who gain a renewed sense of self-worth by taking on an occupation for planting trees. This is a very life-affirming and environmentally just outcome. To donate,
Thank you, Barry. Thank you,
chat
Barry.
and click
Are
on
you,
the URL that I have sent to everyone on this Zoom call. And donate $100 or any amount that you feel you can afford to do to the Eden Reforestation Project. Do it now. Just click on it and you'll bring up the donation page and you'll see a picture of me. It's easy, and when you do it, whether it's now or immediately after this talk, you'll have a great feeling of not only having offset your personal carbon footprint for the year, but those of other loved ones as well. So you have been living carbon-free or carbon neutral. Once you have done that, then forward the URL to your contacts with a personal message of how having made the donation, how you feel about it. Please CC me on that email. Finally, I welcome you to join the Sustainable Rossmoor team to raise funds on your own. You will feel great, and you will be directly contributing toward removing carbon from the atmosphere. Thank you.
In case it wasn't clear, so in the chat is where you can see the link. You can pull up the chat and click on the link, and that would take you to the donation page. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank
ahead.
you, Barry. And it did come through on the chat. Thank you, Barry.
You're welcome.
Next slide. I would now like to introduce Leila McCullough, who is our new film critic. And thank you, Leila. Oh, let me unmute you. Hold on.
Yes, I think.
Okay, now you're unmuted, Leila.
Great. Thank you so much, Marilyn, and hello, everyone. I have to say that I've had the most enjoyable time selecting these films, and along the way, I really, really learned a great deal. So trees are such a miracle of nature, and you'll see this in such a graphic and dramatic way in the film selections. So the films were selected to highlight various aspects of trees. It shows people's passion and love for trees. It shows the science of how they function. It shows their incredible power to reverse climate change and the amazing efforts of nonprofit organizations, social media, even businesses that are all working to try to address our current climate crisis. So we have 8 selections, and I'll speak in depth about 4 and then just mention 2 others very quickly. So the first one is by Judi Dench. It's My Passion for Trees. And of course, we all know her as a wonderful actress, but she's also loved trees all her life. And she describes in this film, it's a very heartwarming, moving film about the trees on her property in England. And she spent a whole year watching them grow through each different season and learning about how they live, breathe, and communicate. And if you ever want to hear water moving up a tree, you'll have to watch this film, because it's not often that you can get to listen to water gurgling along, going up, up, up into a tree that's hundreds of feet high. So I think you'll enjoy that film. The second series actually called Age of Nature on PBS, it only came out last year. And if you want hope, then you definitely have to watch this series. It covers more than trees, but there's many, many segments on trees. And you'll see efforts around the world, individuals and organizations, all planting trees, protection of old forests. And you'll see this in China, in Panama, in Bhutan, in Scotland, in South Africa, Poland, and Indonesia. And you just see such dramatic changes in the landscape when you plant the trees. The third one is actually my favorite, Call of the Forest. It's the Forgotten Wisdom of Trees. And it's by Diana Beresford Kroger. she's an Irish-born botanist and medical biochemist. And she lost her parents when she was very young, about 13 years old. And she went to live with all the elders in the community. She's the last in the line of the Celtic Druids. And the elders passed on their ancient knowledge and wisdom about trees and medicinal plants to her. And this film really covers her love of trees, the science behind their functioning, medicine, and also the Japanese tradition of forest bathing. It's called Shinrin Yoku. So if you want to know about that, you want to watch this. And at the very end of the film, she encourages everybody to develop their own bioplan. So that's a wonderful, broad scope film. And next slide, please, Barry. The intelligent trees, this is an amazing work, actually. You get to see, normally we see everything above the ground and we really appreciate trees, but to know what goes on underneath is even more spectacular. And these two researchers describe the whole fungal network underground that are associated with the roots of trees. And you see how they work together and how trees use them, not only to communicate with other trees, but they also how they share their resources. So it really is a fascinating piece to watch. I think there's one slide before this, Barry. Yes, and I'll just mention this very quickly. The number 5, the tiny urban forest. This is fascinating. It's by the Japanese biologist, Akira Miyawaki. And he pioneered this idea of these tiny urban forests that can be grown on the size of a tennis court. And within 10 to 20 years, you can have a little forest that can sequester carbon, provide shade and habitat for animals. And it could also be fruit and food producing kinds of trees. So that's very interesting. And then the next slide, please, Barry. Hope in a changing climate. I mean, if you want to see stunning, large-scale restoration of totally degraded lands that look like the moon landscape, and you'll see how people have transformed the landscape by planting trees and then having an impact on agriculture and also saving wetlands. But the Lost Plateau in China is really so dramatic when you see the change with the trees being planted. So I hope you get to enjoy these films. And I also wanted to say thank you, a huge thank you to Adrian, that I was able to plant those acorns. All of last year during COVID, after watching Call of the Forest, I became totally obsessed with wanting to plant trees myself, but I couldn't find a place where I could go and put them in the ground. And then I gave up, and then I said, well, I'll join Sustainable Rossmoor because at least they're concerned about the environment. And the very first week that I joined, I heard about the Acorn Project. And I came right towards the end in January, middle of January, actually. And there's only one spot left in the area in Rossmoor. So I went with a friend of mine who wielded a pickaxe to dig through the grass and make those little holes. And now my 6 spots have beautiful little oak trees, and Adrian calls them my oak babies, and they really are, because I go to visit them regularly every week. And now I'm starting to water them as well. And so I don't think I can even put into words how much joy it gives me. I mean, it's just indescribable. So I hope you get to enjoy these films and enjoy them as much as I did, actually. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leila. Your enthusiasm is contagious, I must say. And it was a delightful presentation.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank all of our presenters today, and also not just our presenters, but the members of our committee who have attended our meetings regularly, who have contributed, their thoughts, their ideas, their time, their effort. It really is a collaborative effort, and we are a small but mighty group. And the other thing I would like to say is I would encourage each of you to think about joining, because we would love to have you. There's lots of, as you know, there's many needs and many opportunities to do constructive work in terms of healing our environment. And there's lots of room on our committee for individual initiative, for pursuing individual interest, and getting other members of the committee to join along with you. And it's a wonderful effort. So I thank Sustainable Rossmoor for adopting us as one of their committees and supporting us. And I thank each one of our committee members, and I thank all of you for attending. And I have to tell you, before we move on, I took note of a quote that I discovered for Earth Day. It's a Native American proverb, and it reads, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. Rather, we borrow it from our children." And I just have not stopped thinking about that because it's so profound. So I think we all hope and plan and work for a better future for our planet. And I know each of you probably do it in your own way. We've decided to do it collectively as part of our group. So please think about joining us. Now I'm going to move over to the chat feature, and I see that Leila has, or Barry, you've included the links for all the films that Leila has mentioned. So thank you, Barry. And if any of you are interested, you can access the chat feature to find those links.
Yeah, you can go to it now. You can make a copy of the chat to get the links, or you can click on the bottom right where there's 3 horizontal dots, and that will save the chat for you. But then you have to know where it's saved to. So it might just be easier, if you don't know that, to just to highlight and make copies and put it on a word processor, blank page.
Great, thank you, Barry. And Barry, could you put on our last slide? I think
Sure.
I think we have one more slide.
Okay, hold on. Let me have to lower the chat feature, or it blocks the view.
Okay, thank you, Barry.
Okay. Here we go.
Thank you. And for those of you who are interested in more information about our committee or about any of the topics that we've discussed today, we've included our email addresses. So please feel free to contact any one of us for more information.
Marilyn, if people want a list of the films with some description, if they email me, I could send them a Word document with all of it in it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Leila. That would be great.
Okay, and I'll once we stop the share, I can copy this and put it in the chat so people can just
Wonderful.
copy and paste those email addresses.
Okay.
Okay, so
It looks like we actually have one message in our chat from Paul. Paul Wright. It's to everyone. He says, "I'd also like to recommend a remarkable recent novel in which trees are the main character. It's called The Overstory by Richard Chambers. A very unconventional and thought-provoking book." Thank you, Paul. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to put that on my reading list. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add to the chat feature?
I just added the members' names and email addresses
Great.
to the chat.
Thank you. And I see many folks here who are new to, some names I recognize, some I don't. I want to welcome all of you.
You can
And,
unmute, you can unmute yourselves now if you want to say something.
Does anyone have any comments to make?
Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you. I love your enthusiasm. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Super job, everybody did. Great resources.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, happy Earth Day, everyone. Our work continues.
Happy Earth Day.
Thank you, Ton. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.